Every community has its clerisy, its poets and philosophers, in short, its learned men. It is the clerisy which frames the nation, lays down its canons, and interprets them. It is the clerisy which embodies the nation, inspires its courage, rouses its fury. And when the fury of a people is fired by religious fervor, men of mind are bound to do the duties of men of action. In Islam, mind and action merge into the moral obligations of religious law. It is the clerisy of the Muslim people, the ulama, who lay down the canons of Islam and interprets them, whose solemn duty it is to fire the people's religious fervor and steer them to action. It is a remarkable feature of the great jihads of the Western Sudan that the leadership for these wars of religious fervor should have sprung forth from a single source, the Torodbe clerisy. For it was the Torodbe ulama who sustained the jihad in Futabundu and established an Islamic community, Jam'ah, under the leadership of Malik C. It was the Torodbe clerisy who roused the fury of the people of Futajanon and founded the Sidianki community. Again, it was the Torodbe clerisy who opened the Bab of Jihad, door of action, for the people of Futatoro, framed their constitution, and laid down their canons of conscience. And it was these Islamic revolutions of the 17th and 18th centuries which prefigured the jihads of Usman bin Fodio and Al-Hajj Umar bin Said, perhaps the most illustrious leaders thrown upon by the Torodbe. Long it has been viewed that these Islamic revolutions were simply Fulani jihads, as consummate examples of the way in which the Fulbe skillfully orchestrated the people in favor of their own views. But it will now appear that those Muslims who have been calling Fulani deserved this designation in language and culture only, and that they were drawn from diverse strains of Sudani society, that the Torodbe suggests a life work and not an ethnic category simply. As the doors of knowledge for the champions of truth are open to all peoples, as the great sage Uthman bin Fodio pointed out. But he also remarked this in his Wasiyya, and I quote, "He does not despise the language of Fulbe if he is one of us. This is because it is our speech and the speech of our fathers and ancestors. Whoever neglects the language of Fulbe is not from among us. I strongly advise you, by Allah, not to neglect and abandon this language. If you are someone who is not meticulous in learning, then at least hold on to the greetings of morning and evening, and the household needs and the like." The Torodbe clerisy evolved out of that mass of ruthless peoples who perceived in Islam a source of cultural identity, bound in a new persuasion, linked by a common oppression. They shook the sense of ethnic difference and sought to stimulate a conscious trend of a leveling nature. Thrust only by religious impulse, they extricated themselves from a solitary minority position and emerged the dominant ruling group in several societies of the Western Sudan. There will seem little doubt that the Torodbe Muslims were of an eclectic social and ethnic origin. Islam served as a springboard and refuge for these persons who appear to have had no other means of expressing their qualities. Proverbs collected by Gaden, for example, stress the humble status of this group and the abuse which they suffered at the hands of the Fulbe warriors. One such saying is, "The Torodo is a beggar," betrays the mendicant activities of Torodbe Sheikhs and their students, who seem to have subsisted almost entirely of the charity of others. Similar epithets, "son of the calabash," and "if the calabash did not exist, the Torodo will not survive." They sustain the notion of mendicancy and explain why Torodbe became objects of derision. Again, the openness of the Torodbe society and the modest origins of its members are given wicked emphasis in the following proverbs. If a fisher pursues learning, he becomes a Torodo, and he will take a Fulbe woman for his wife. Or, a slave need only pursue learning in order to be considered a Torodo. And finally, A Torodo is a slave. This inauspicious beginning became a stigma on their person, not to be easily lost sight of upon their rise to power. Arsin recounts the stinging words of the Denyanke Satigi to Makajiba, the Imam of Bundu. You are nothing more than a Torodo. You have been created for nothing more than misery and servitude. But by custom and convention among the people of Futatoro, the term Torodbe came to be associated with the inhabitants of villages and towns with the following conditions: that they should become learned in the Islamic sciences, even if they originated in rural areas or had pursued a primitive existence; that they should speak Fulbe and not an Arabic or foreign tongue; that they should disavow inferior occupations, which is to say occupations unregarded by the cosmovisions of Futatoro, among which were fishing, blacksmithing, weaving, as well as tanning and related endeavors; and lastly, that they should forsake the nomadic life endemic among the Fulbe. Historically, then, those who acquired ilm, knowledge, resided in towns, and refused to engage in occupations regarded as degrading, whether by origin or convention, came to be classified as Torodbe. It is rather more difficult to define the precise ethnic composition of the Torodbe, and there will appear to be no consensus as to how these components coalesced into a cohesive unit. Whatever their precise origins, the Torodbe went on to establish a society open to all individuals, prepared to embrace their customs and beliefs. There has been left some impressions of the ways in which new members became linked to this group. No restrictions seem to have been placed on the rights of the freeborn. They settled and intermarried without interference. Other classes of individuals, however, conformed to certain conventions. If a religious instructor became satisfied with the progress of his student, he was apt to adopt him as a compatriot and attach him to his own family by virtue of covenant. Indeed, very many slaves were emancipated and incorporated into the Torodbe society in just this way. The practice of attaching individuals by covenant seems to have taken its rise in early Arabia, and is later instanced in the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is said that he effected a covenant between his muadhin Bilal and Abu Ruhayya. This pattern is much rehearsed in the rise of revolutionary Torodbe movements throughout the western Sudan. The Turudiya make a dramatic entrance into the annals of Sudan Islam with the struggle of one of their number, Malik C, which culminated into the establishment of the Sisibe community in Bundu. It will appear that this leader and his followers, known collectively as the Sisibe, were caused to depart from Futatoro under duress, as tradition celebrated their arrival in the Galam as fugitives fleeing some political persecution. Bundu, a section of the Galam where the new community was to take root, was sparsely Kafo, a slave, populated by Fulfulde and Mande-speaking peoples. Specific mention is made of the Fatube, a Fulbe people who seem to have carried on a primitive existence, residing in tree trunks, caves, and subterranean hollows without established leadership. According to the scholars, these people made a covenant with Malik C on condition that they adapt to a sedentary mode of existence and construct dwellings of a more permanent kind. Here, we are reminded of Musa's Kamara's dictum that those Fulbe who wished to convert to Islam were caused to disdain their primitive mode of existence before entering the ranks of the Turodiya. Malik C made a covenant with another Fulbe group in the region, the Girobe, who also accepted his leadership. These two groups, together with his original followers, formed the nucleus of his new community. He then proceeded to make Bundu a place of refuge for all those peoples of the Senegal-Mali region wishing to share an identity of religious feeling. Torodbe and Fulbe came from Futatoro and Jalon, Wolof from the upper Senegal. Sarajulle and Jawara are said to have fled persecution into the Karta. The desperate plight of these individuals is everywhere given emphasis in tradition, and it will seem that the Sisibe set the pattern for other Torodbe communities in subsequent eras. All their inhabitants, presumably the Fatuve and Girowe, as well as the Futatoro companions of Malik C, formed the Freemen. Caste groups were attached to the three servile families which made the migration with the founder. Early accounts identify these cases as coming under the leadership of Tambakante, a smith, Sebilaya, a grayot, and Keri, a slave. The Torodbe movement seems to have taken hold in Futajalon in very much the same way, but not so much in Nigeria. Let us now go on the technicisms of their scholarship and the nature of their learning. We will take example in the Fudui family, that in which Sheikh Uthman dan Fodio was part of. To start, I will go through their earliest non-clerical ancestors, as a way to emphasize the high cadre of the Torodbe. The clerical clan of name Gurtu was the primary source of education in Songhai during the upheavals of the 16th century. They were Fulani. This family name was famous in the Fulani lands of Masina, which is modern Mali, in the personage of Muhammad Gurtu ibn Mudi Muhammad Saj and his erudite descendants. The father of Muhammad Gurtu, as I said before, was Mudi Muhammad Saj, the chief judge of the district of Masina. The major influence upon Songhai and Western Bilad as Sudan with regards to the diffusion of learning rested upon two of the descendants of Muhammad Gurtu, Ahmad and Muhammadu Bagyugu. These two scholars, along with their descendants, were considered the direct intellectual masters of the renowned Kunta family. The Gurtu clan was exceptionally gifted scholars who maintained erudition at a time when learning was in decline because of the Moroccan Portuguese invasion of 1599. From his progeny came the Fodiwa, who had great figures, as I said, such as Uthman dan Fodio, Abdullahi dan Fodio, and the illuminated sage Abdul Qadir dan Tafa. The lineage from Uthman and Abdullah goes as follows. Their father, Muhammad, and his honorific name, Fuduye, was the son of Uthman ibn Saleh ibn Harun ibn Muhammad Gurtu. The Fodiwa of Hausalan during the pre-jihad period had the next methodology to teach their students. They first learned the Quran at a young age. Upon finishing memorization, then they went to study the tafsir of Al-Jalalain, of a grammatical nature. In the science of jurisprudence, fiqh, they studied the Risalat of Ibn Abi Zayd, and then the commentaries of this book, Ashmawiyya and Al-Akhdari. Then the student will be introduced to Arabic grammar by study of the Al-Ajurumiyya of Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Sanhaji, and then an intensive study of the Al-Afiyat of Ibn Malik. In this stage of the student's training, he had to memorize 40 prophetic traditions, hadith. After that, many students, upon the completion of this stage, became preachers, teachers, imams, clerics, and scribes. The last stage of learning among the Fodiwa included an increased study of the four branches of Islamic sciences, tafsir, hadith, fiqh, and usul. Affixed to that was a deep study of grammar, literary style, logic, theology, and occultism. Education centered around the texts of which embodied the social behavior of the people of Medina during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the early community of Islam. The Muwatta of Imam Malik, Al-Mudawana, Al-Mukhtasar, Al-Shifa, and Al-Jami of Al-Miyar. The students of this stage included the most learned and intellectually ambitious. Many of the students were actually scholars and practicing jurists. The reason for this was that there was no such thing as completion to one's education. Knowledge was sought from the cradle to the grave. The teachers of this level were often judges and jurists who were dealing directly with applied jurisprudence and an existential Islam which embraced governance, punitive punishments, medicine, astronomy, commerce, and other sociological sciences. Sheikh Uthman decided not to follow a quiet career of reading, teaching, and writing. He had the Torodbe spirit of revolution. At the age of 20, he began publicly calling the people of Hausaland to Allah. This methodology was learned from his uncle, Sheikh Uthman bin Duri, upon whom Sheikh Uthman molded his character based upon piety, commanding the good and forbidding the evil. According to Gidadu Wazir Danlama, Sheikh Uthman had more than 88 teachers. 18 of these were from his immediate Fodiwa clan, 3 were Berber Muslimen, and the remainder were members of the Torodbe Fulani. Another sheikh who exerted the most influence upon Sheikh Uthman was Jibril ibn Umar, a Tuareg from Agadez. This sheikh taught Uthman, Abdullahi, Muhammad Bello, the son of Uthman, and others many Islamic sciences. He also initiated them into the 3 Sufi orders, the Qadiriyya, the Khalwatiyya, and the Shadhiliyya. The last of these, the Shadhiliyya, is sort of connected to Uthman already, as he claims descent from a woman who descended from the founder of the Shadhili Tariqa. We go back to Jibril. He was a very militant teacher, and he was keen on initiating reform among the people of Hausaland. The key points which Sheikh Jibril and later Sheikh Uthman aimed to change in the Hausa people were general ignorance of the fundamentals of theology and worship, syncretisms mixing of Islamic practices with animist customs, heretical innovations emerging among the Sufis and the evil scholars, governance based upon Islamic modes and methodologies, and rampant injustice and oppression. Sheikh Uthman sought to revolve these social ills by means of teaching. He taught the salvation of mankind was based upon people following the Quran and the Sunnah. Knowledge to Uthman was divided into 3 fundamentals: Iman, faith, Islam, surrender, and Ihsan, spiritual excellence. Another aspect of the reform ideas of Uthman was his substantial reliance upon mystical visions and messianic doctrines. This factor gave the Sheikh his charismatic appeal to his followers and supporters, and will garner the assistance he will need for his eventual Torodbe revolution against the Hausa tyrants. But here is the specialty of this social clerical class, the ultimate goal of knowledge, gnosis or ma'arifah. As Uthman said, this special knowledge is the goal of all knowledge. It is the knowledge of the champions of truth, as-siddiqun, those who are brought nigh, al-muqarrabun, and the prophets, upon them be peace. They do not speak about this knowledge except by means of enigmas and hints, by way of summarization and comparison, as knowledge from them because of the inability of the intellects of mankind to understand it. Since the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets, there is no way for them to relinquish the way of adherence and imitation. Nothing from this knowledge will be opened up to those who possess these 2 qualities, innovation and pride. And everyone who is in love with this world or is persistent in following his corruption passions will never be able to realize or implement this knowledge, even though he may be able to realize and study the rest of the religious knowledge. And the least of punishments against the one who rejects this knowledge is that he will not be endowed with anything from it. And whoever does not have a share of this knowledge, it is feared for him an evil ending. And the least of shares from this knowledge is belief in it and handing it over to its people. Success is with Allah. Thus, with knowledge of esoteric and occult sciences and texts, these Clerisy established themselves as the people with the highest cult of knowledge in perhaps the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa. I will speak on its particulars and characteristics in a future video. In this video, we explored how the great jihads of the Western Sudan were driven not simply by ethnicity, but by the Torodbe clerical tradition, a scholarly movement rooted in Islamic learning and reform. The Torodbe functioned more as an intellectual and religious identity than an ethnic label. Cultivated scholars, covering Quran, Maliki jurisprudence, grammar, theology, and Sufism. A reform movement across the lands aimed to correct ignorance, injustice, and syncretism through deep scholarship, spiritual discipline, and the ultimate pursuit of higher gnosis. which defined them as one of the most knowledge-centered clerical classes in pre-colonial sub-Saharan Africa. Assalamu alaikum.